Ryan, a very experienced player, top 8 already this season at Portland Regional Championships, and some solid finishes before that as well.
Yeah, has that finalist there from Hartford Regional Championships in 2023. So also looking to add that first regional championship title to that incredible list of accomplishments. And I think that the Ice Rider Calyrex could very well get the job done. It is one of the remaining big restricted threats that we have in our Regulation G meta as it has come to this point.
It's been one of the most consistent ones from the very beginning of Regulation G to this point. Hasn't had a huge spike in popularity, but hasn't fallen off either, and was still present in this top 8. And this has been a pretty consistent way to build around that at Calyrex Ice Rider. It has the Trick Room mode with Amoonguss. It has the support from Incineroar, has Pelipper to try and weaken fire type attacks coming in, as well as providing wide guard support, and in this case, helping hand support, which I think is a great tech. And then consistently, we've seen the Urshifu Rapid Strike also paired with Calyrex Ice Rider to give you a fast mode that can also benefit from Pelipper. So a solid construction of 6 Pokemon that we've already seen have success in prior tournaments.
Yeah, but taking a look at Keon, also a player that is looking to add that very first regional championship title to this list of accomplishments. It's a lot of top 64s this season, which is an incredible feat in itself. 2024 has really been a very strong year of Pokemon.
Really a breakthrough performance, though, to elevate from top 64 into the top 4 of this tournament. It's like the next level, the next step on that progression. Really impressive to see, and I'm excited to see whether Keon can bring Zacian and this unique pick into the finals. The Zacian, paired with a few interesting Pokemon, the Umbreon allows it to have, gives you a bulky kind of pivoting Pokemon that especially can play well into Calyrex Shadow Rider, but also should provide some value against Calyrex Ice Rider. Lots of other attackers around it. The Qianpao can deal a lot of damage, but also help amplify the damage from Zacian, and a couple physical attackers to go with that, with the Urshifu Rapid Strike and the Rillaboom holding an Assault Vest. Both players with the Choice Scarf Urshifu, we may see them up against each other, and right out of the way, Keon's got one Urshifu, and there's the other one on the other side.
Oh, wow, okay. So we've got the dueling Urshifus ahead of each other, as well as the Pelipper. I feel like that's going to play a huge role in enabling both of these Urshifu.
Both Urshifu now have boosted Surging Strikes, but both of them only have Water Resist to fire into on the other side. Pelipper gets the better of the Rillaboom versus Pelipper matchup, but of course the Rillaboom on Keon's side is a problem for the Urshifu on Ryan's side. Can either just go after it with a Wood Hammer or pressure something like a Surging Strikes plus Grassy Glide to try to take out the Urshifu on the other side before it can even move, if Keon is confident that his Urshifu is faster. Pelipper, though, is a little bit more difficult to take off the field, would require a double target, and can fire a Hurricane in either slot. No, at this point, just helping handing to boost the Urshifu on Ryan's side.
Well, the Rillaboom's going to go for the Grassy Glide, though. Pelipper is not resistant to that. It's just going to be some neutral damage, as it is the close combat in response. A one-hit knockout into Keon's Urshifu means that it doesn't get a chance to move in this game just yet. The Choice Scarf helping Ryan's to move faster.
Ryan seizing the speed advantage, has the faster Urshifu Rapid Strike, or just tied and wins the coin flip on that turn, but it means with the Helping Hand boost from Pelipper, able to pick up the close combat and stop the Urshifu Rapid Strike on the other side before it can even attack. You have to imagine with the targeting from Keon, that's probably looking for something like Surging Strikes plus Grassy Glide to take a KO onto Pelipper before it can get a Hurricane off, but that's stopped in its tracks because of the close combat now. Urshifu does lose a stage of defense, makes it a lot more vulnerable to a Grassy Glide from the other side, and Zacian gets to come in here relatively for free, doesn't have to worry about taking a Surging Strikes on the other side, but of course, the Urshifu is still the fastest thing on the field. It's still going to fire a close combat into one of these slots. It's still going to deal a ton of damage if it doesn't get disrupted by Grassy Glide.
Yeah, and it's tough too, because I think what you're really hoping for is that you are able to make some type of piece of resistance against the Ice Rider Calyrex that you're expecting to be in the back. That's kind of unusual when we see these Ice Rider Calyrex teams to not see that Pokemon led and try to establish that Trick Room right away. But we still aren't going to see it just yet. Ryan actually opting to switch out the Urshifu, reset those drops and the move that it's locked into in favor of this Amoonguss that takes that Grassy Glide so much better. And in fact, is going to dish out even a bit more damage back with that Rocky Helmet recoil. But as we see that Behemoth Blade into the Pelipper, it has an invisible Focus Sash, and it's just able to hang on through all of that hurt, firing off a Weather Ball into the Zacian to bring it to half already.
That's a really pivotal damage dealt to Zacian. It's going to lower it enough that something like Urshifu later on can easily deal with it with a close combat or a Surging Strikes. You could see the effect that the kind of magnetism that Urshifu Rapid Strike had in that last position. Keon already behind in the game, didn't want to give up another close combat, and so had to chase the Urshifu with a Grassy Glide, despite Amoonguss being such an easy switch in there, and then of course missing the KO into Pelipper makes that a very punishing turn for Keon.
Well, the Behemoth Blade is going to deal a significant amount of damage to the Amoonguss, but you're still whittling away at the Zacian's HP pool with the opportunity to go for just a little bit of Rocky Helmet chip back. An unfortunate miss from this Rillaboom, though, with the high horsepower, ends up getting punished with not only the damage from this Hurricane, but also with that huge confusion. And the Spore into the Zacian is just insult to injury here.
Such an important miss. The Amoonguss might have been healthy enough to take that attack anyway. This turn I don't think was going to go very well for Keon regardless. The Hurricane into Rillaboom is just those health bars going lower and lower. Already lost Urshifu on the first turn and now has Zacian and Rillaboom quite low. But Amoonguss not taking the high horsepower means it's still relatively healthy here. If it switches out and gets a set of Regenerator, will look even more healthy towards the end of the game. And Zacian not having slept for a turn now, it's going to be a long time before Keon can get any value out of that Zacian. For now, Rillaboom just headed to the back in favor of this Umbreon.
Ooh, well, kind of looking a little bit more forward. This Umbreon actually has a really unique position in this matchup because in its moveset, it does have access to Taunt and Foul Play, which might be a really great way of shutting down this Amoonguss from going for anything else, as well as shutting down a Trick Room option in the back. This Zacian, though, it fell asleep and now it's down for the count. Does provide an option for this Rillaboom to come back in and have some sort of fake-out pressure, but even take a look at how much Pollen Puff is doing to this Dark-type Umbreon.
The health bars are just getting so low. Zacian only has to sleep for one turn before going down to Weather Ball, and now it's a quite low Rillaboom and an already damaged Umbreon that's not going to be able to win a 1v4. Keon has dealt some damage. Amoonguss is low, Pelipper all the way down to that false Focus Sash at 1 health, but still has all 4 Pokemon. Rillaboom can probably deal with one of them, but dealing with all of the team is just going to be too much to ask. It feels like Ryan has an unsurmountable advantage in this game 1.
Really does. I mean, you can go for the Grassy Glide here to at least deal with the threat of this Pelipper. You're not going to get any recoil back from hitting into the Rocky Helmet that this Amoonguss is carrying, and you kind of hope that maybe Umbreon's going to be able to do a little bit more. The Snarl, a pretty nice twist to lock into just to help whittle away this Amoonguss, but it also mitigates some of the damage that this Pollen Puff is going to be able to do, and it's going to allow this Rillaboom to survive.
Yeah, really crucial for Keon to not go down to only Umbreon at this point. The Snarl is enough to mitigate the damage coming from the Pollen Puff on the other side, combined with the Assault Vest on Rillaboom, lets it just hang on, get some grassy terrain recovery. Still a very uphill battle with 2 damaged Pokemon, and Ryan not even having to show his restricted Pokemon yet. No grassy terrain also means Rillaboom doesn't have priority anymore, so this Urshifu Rapid Strike is going to have free reign to go out on the offense and just take out Rillaboom before it can move. There's no way to stop it. It's just going to be a Surging Strikes going into that slot.
Yeah, it's such a tough ask, and it's really unfortunate how that grassy terrain expiration was timed with the return of this Urshifu. But one way to keep yourself in this fight is by having this defensive Terra on this Umbreon to change it into this Water Terra type. It's going to resist those Rapid Strike Urshifu hits, and it also removes that weakness to if you were to take a close combat here. So perhaps this Umbreon still has a little bit more stay in this fight. If there's a yawn, there's a way. Return the favor with this sleep.
No doubt that it's going to take Ryan a substantial amount of time to deal with the Water-type Umbreon. We know that his last Pokemon is the Calyrex Ice Rider. Now as a Water-type Umbreon also resists Glacial Lance. And so in another way this game could have played out, where there were a lot more resources left on Keon's side, that Water Terrestrialization could have a big impact. But ultimately it happens when Keon is already down to 1 Pokemon. It's just too much of an uphill battle. He concedes that game and moves us into game 2. I think there are signs of life for Keon in the ways that can play out, but that turn 1 was just so devastating with the Helping Hand close combat, giving Ryan a 4-3 lead before the 3rd attack even went off.
It's tough because what on Keon's team actually resists the close combat? You have the Tornadus, but it's so tough to feel like you can actually bring it into a matchup like this because you know that there's always that imminent threat of Trick Room going up.
One really critical piece is something you touched on in game 1, which is guessing the lead matchup here. For these Calyrex Ice Rider leads, you often expect them to lead the Calyrex Ice Rider, and you feel like you must lead what your answer to the Calyrex Ice Rider is, or else you're going to get quickly overwhelmed by a Trick Room and a Glacial Lance. But when they opt for a different mode, something like the Pelipper and the Urshifu that have instant offense in a different direction that can really backfoot you quickly. And it's how Ryan was able to establish that early lead. It wasn't even a necessarily like critically poor lead into Pelipper and Urshifu, but it was definitely, I would expect something different than what Keon was expecting.
I think it's tough too because you and I talked about this matchup even a little bit, got into the top 4, and you were talking about the Rillaboom choice. Was it the right Pokemon to be able to bring into a matchup like this? Keon seems to think so. Actually going to lead that Rillaboom again, and it's the same leads across the board for both of our players heading into this game too.
Rillaboom, a really key piece for dealing with the Urshifu on the other side, but has a lot of uphill battles in this match. In the last game, we saw it have to deal with an Amoonguss that just switched in and dealt Rocky Helmet damage back, and a Pelipper that landed a massive Hurricane for a ton of damage into it, and that's before the Calyrex Ice Rider that would have been threatening a 1-hit with Glacial Lance. So a lot of difficult Pokemon for the Rillaboom to fight against, but if you feel like it's your only way to stop the Urshifu Rapid Strike that had so much impact for Ryan, then you can see why it's being led and why we're back in the same leads as Fake Out goes into Pelipper this time, no helping hand, instead just a close combat into the Urshifu on the other side.
And you can see how well that Urshifu is able to take that without that helping hand. So a really smart decision by Keon to actually just go for the Fake Out into the Pelipper instead. It's going to help break the Focus Sash. Obviously, doesn't matter if you're going to hit it with the Surging Strikes as well. That's going to be a multi-hit attack, but it does bring this Pelipper down low enough that another Grassy Glide will be able to finish it off, or even potentially an Aqua Jet.
Possibly. I think the way this turn 1 plays out explains a lot of the turn 1 of the previous game. You can see that Surging Strikes plus Fake Out isn't enough damage to pick up Pelipper. You can see why the Grassy Glide was targeted into Pelipper for that reason, but also close combat doesn't KO the Urshifu on the other side. We've now seen 2 instances where Ryan's Urshifu moves before Keon's Scarf Urshifu, probably establishing that it's consistently the faster Pokemon. I mean, just able to threaten a close combat into Urshifu again, but has to watch out for now. It already lost 1 stage of defense from the close combat on the previous turn. Grassy Glide might be enough damage to just pick up a KO here. If you just allow a Grassy Glide into Urshifu and a Surging Strikes into Pelipper for 2 KOs, well, that's a massive, massive lead for Keon. So Ryan probably going to be forced to reposition in some way here and find another avenue. That is the Urshifu switching out, trying to find the next position for it to be more successful in the field, and Amoonguss just coming in to take the Grassy Glide instead.
It's a smart call to just keep that Urshifu safe, but guess what? Keon's not going to make that same mistake twice, going for the ever so juicy Grassy Glide into that Urshifu slot. Instead, going to go for the Aqua Jet, which is plenty to pick up the Pelipper. So, smart calculations there as well to know that that is going to get caught.
Really good insurance on that turn. Keon is expecting that the Urshifu is going to switch out, not take a Grassy Glide, and so he doesn't want to hit into that slot and be 1 turn behind. So he tries to be 1 turn ahead and switches Umbreon in. But you have to recognize the risk with that is the Urshifu just stays in close combat to your Urshifu anyway. Well, a good way to make sure that there isn't as much risk from that is to go for the Aqua Jet and just pick up the KO on the other side, or onto the Pelipper on the other side that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just makes sure too that this Pelipper isn't going to keep doing that to the Zacian in the back. It's going to be the opportunity to go for the Water Terra now. That Umbreon is so safe. No longer are you going to get knocked out to something like a close combat, and it's great for the Calyrex, as you mentioned too, to resist the Glacial Lances.
It does seem like it's the best terrestrialization in this matchup. It gives Umbreon so much staying power. It's going to be really difficult for Ryan to take it out, and having it come on the field earlier means it's going to have more impact, but for now, just a close combat into Urshifu in the first KO for Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, this Urshifu has already kind of done its job, though. I feel like it's going to allow this Rillaboom to come back in, have the opportunity to set back up that Fake Out, and the foul play into the Urshifu is not very effective, but take a look at how much more it's going to be able to do. This Water Terrestrialization also continuing to pay off in spades. Go ahead and remove that weakness to the Pollen Puff as well.
It feels like the Water Terrestrialization solves all of Umbreon's type problems. No longer weak to Pollen Puff and no longer weak to the close combat that this Urshifu on the other side is now locked into. Rillaboom doesn't have to worry about a Rage Powder and can just threaten a Grassy Glide in that slot. The Umbreon can also threaten a Taunt into the Amoonguss, like you mentioned before, and so this feels like a pretty strong position for Keon. We've had a trade of the Pelipper for the Urshifu. We also had it slowed down. A lot of times the most volatile position in a match is the lead, and Keon has gotten it slowed down into a more comfortable position for his team.
It has been much better and still hasn't revealed that 4th or final Pokemon yet, and the patience is rewarded. Finally able to land that Grassy Glide into the target that this Rillaboom was so desperately trying to angle towards, as the Umbreon attempts to go for a taunt into the Amoonguss to shut down all of its utility, but Ryan down to his final 2 Pokemon in this second game.
Very quickly moved to the final 2 Pokemon in this game. Just took a few turns for the KO to land into both Urshifu and Pelipper. Now, Umbreon, I think, is in an excellent position. Can threaten a Taunt into Amoonguss, and once that lands, can try to chase down the Calyrex Ice Rider with a Foul Play. You have to imagine that Calyrex is going to Terra into a fire type here. We'll let it be neutral to foul play and resist grass attacks on the other side. And one Glacial Lance will deal a ton of damage into this Rillaboom and start to pick up Grenade boosts and be a big problem, I think.
I think what's tough about this too is that you are going to also kind of predict that, I think, if you're Keon. You have the opportunity to go for the high horsepower here, and in front of a Pokemon that has safety goggles and a grassy Rillaboom, okay, you're just actually going to hit it with the Wood Hammer.
Trying to chase as much damage as possible if it stays as an ice type, still does a decent chunk of damage to it as a fire type. The foul play added on top of that gets Calyrex pretty low.
Yeah, but the Glacial Lance in response, you can see that that Rillaboom is not going to be able to take that. So it is just a one-hit knockout and allows this Ice Rider Calyrex to get the snowball going.
The first boost down, Chilling Neigh gives +1 attack to Calyrex, but that also does mean foul play starts doing more and more damage as well. This Pollen Puff really crucial to heal Calyrex Ice Rider back up and make sure that Umbreon isn't just threatening a KO on the next turn.
Yeah, I mean, it's so tough because I think too, like, even though we saw the super effective nature get taken away from the foul play, it's still doing a lot, even just as a neutral hit. Oh, and with the Zacian in the back as well, perfectly safe and healthy, this is going to be Keon's final Pokemon in this game too as well.
We're down to the last two on either side. Zacian can't hit into this Fire-type Calyrex very well. Just has Steel and Fairy coverage, meaning that they're both resisted by the Fire-type Calyrex. Of course, both of these Pokemon now resist Glacial Lance, since you'd expect to see Calyrex Ice Rider switch to coverage, of which it can threaten a KO onto the Zacian on the other side straight away.
And now, though, that you don't really have a great way to be able to hit the Calyrex, you have to also figure out how are you actually going to deal with this Amoonguss. That Amoonguss Pollen Puff ended up really healing up so much of that damage onto the Calyrex.
Plays such an important role. The Calyrex Ice Rider would have been worn down so quickly, but instead looks pretty healthy. And Amoonguss probably just looking for a taunt here, buying time with a Protect, or no, just a double Protect to stall through this turn.
Gives Ryan a little bit of breathing room, tries to figure out exactly what's going to happen here, but Keon does not let that go unpunished. One way that this Zacian can get through some of the health of these two Pokemon, just set up the Sword Stance.
What a gutsy call to recognize that in a very difficult in-game. Zacian wasn't going to be able to deal out that much damage, and that it needed to get an attack boost to really be a problem, and manages to find the perfect opportunity for it with Ryan just using a double Protect to scout. Not really trying to move through any condition on the field or anything, just looking to see what Keon would do. Well, what Keon would do is Sword Stance, grab an attack boost, and turn that Zacian into a massive problem for Ryan. Should be able to threaten a 1-hit KO onto Amoonguss now. Of course, that can just be traded back likely for a KO from the Calyrex Ice Rider, which would leave the Umbreon against the Calyrex Ice Rider on the other side, but those foul plays will quickly mount, and if Zacian is able to pick up a KO on Amoonguss, there are no more Pollen Puffs. This turn, though, Zacian just protecting itself.
Smart call. You've already put a target on its back, and so you want to do your best to make sure it's not going to be a target of something like a high horsepower, but the Umbreon is able to land the taunt into this Amoonguss after it fails to go for the double Protect. So you don't have the agency anymore to be able to pivot away these moves from the Zacian.
Really smart, I think, also to force no Protect on this next turn. It takes away the risk of a double Protect. If the Amoonguss had landed the double Protect while Zacian tried to attack into it, and then Zacian went down to high horsepower, well, immediately Ryan regains the lead in this game. But with the taunt on the previous turn, Amoonguss just stuck. Pollen Puffing can be totally ignored, and a Behemoth Blade can go into Calyrex.
It's going to be close because the foul play to be able to follow it up. That +1 Chilling Neigh is enough to make that foul play to get the knockout. And it's just going to be this Amoonguss Keon. It's going to bring this back. It feels like it is game number 2.
Such a gutsy Sword Stance that enabled it to happen, and then a couple of really tactical, smart plays, getting the taunt onto Amoonguss, managing to protect Zacian at all the right times, and winning a game 2 that did not look like it was in his favor at some points.
It really didn't, but Keon was able to play that so smart, so patient, and just those tiny micro adjustments that he made on turn 1 and turn 2 of that game completely changed the tides. Allowed him to find this opportunity to get out 2 of those big threats outside of Trick Room and the Pelipper as well as that Urshifu, and helped him really get his foot back in the game.
Managed to control the speed throughout a lot of the game as well. Once the Urshifu Rapid Strike on the other side went down, Keon consistently had the faster Pokemon, was able to then have a lot of the agency in where the targeting was going. Ryan had to use defensive Terastallizations and try to protect through turns, try to scout out with double protects to understand where Keon might be targeting, and Keon was able to punish it with that Sword Stance.
And it was tough too, because I think this Amoonguss ends up playing a really key piece here for Ryan, whether it is the side Pollen Puffs to make sure that this Ice Rider Calyrex is staying alive, or it's just helping to redirect away some of the pressure that Ice Rider Calyrex may be under. Being able to shut that off with a taunt was so important, and then you are just able to bypass some of the issues that Amoonguss would place onto a non-grass type Pokemon in that Zacian. But we are about to get underway here with our third and final game in this top 4 to see whether or not Keon or Ryan are going to move forward to the grand finals of the LA Regional Championships, and a big switch up here for Ryan as it's the Raging Bolt and the Incineroar for this third game.
Keon sticks to the game plan, has Rillaboom and Urshifu on the field, but like you mentioned, a total shift up for Ryan, has the Raging Bolt and the Incineroar on the field. Raging Bolt matches up into both of these Pokemon fairly well, does have to worry about a high horsepower plus close combat double up. Incineroar has to be wary of taking a Surging Strikes, could fake out either of these Pokemon and try to slow things down for a turn, but it might not be to Ryan's advantage because it's hard for the Raging Bolt to really capitalize on that if Urshifu just protects itself.
For sure, but this Incineroar too, I think, is feeling the stress a little bit. That Urshifu could also pack a super effective close combat into that slot, so what better to take that than the Amoonguss that would be able to deal with that a little bit better. But a nice fake out into this Raging Bolt means that it is not free to go for an attack this turn. It's gonna give this Urshifu some breathing room to try to whittle away at its tankiness.
Ultimately, Incineroar went untargeted on that turn, could have stayed on the field, but it was still in a poor position even if it stayed on the field. Wouldn't have done much more than Parting Shot back or U-turn back off the field. The Raging Bolt takes us close combat for a substantial chunk, but still doesn't look like it's in range of another close combat. The Grass Eagle Train recovery helping keep it a little more healthy as well.
Oh, well, here's one way that you can stop that threat of something like a Thunderclap just KOing your Urshifu, especially after you just dropped your special defense. Just go for the Grass Terra, and the Thunderclap isn't even what this Raging Bolt is going to lock into. It's just going to have to take this close combat, and whatever follow-up is going to happen, but the high horsepower is going to miss into the Raging Bolt. No way! The Raging Bolt then gets an opportunity to fire back with his Draco Meteor, calling that this Terra is going to come through in a one-hit knockout in return.
Just a brutal miss. Swings the tide of this game so much. The Grass Terastallization was called. It wasn't a Thunderclap into that slot. It was just a Draco Meteor. Oh, and the Pollen Puff adds insult to injury. As the low health Raging Bolt, it would have been KO'd by high horsepower, ends up ending the turn about 70% health after the Grassy Train and the Pollen Puff. Just a massive swing in this game.
Oh, that's twice now. Keon has not been able to hit those high horsepowers. And with that punish means that there's an opportunity here too for this Incineroar to keep just lowering the attack stat of this Rillaboom. It might be really tanky. It still has a good tight matchup into something like the Raging Bolt and the Amoonguss, and especially with the Assault Vest, helps it stay a little bit healthier. But Keon's definitely got his work cut out for him now.
Absolutely. That Incineroar starts to look a lot more difficult to deal with. Left on Ryan's side, it can come back in, intimidate this Rillaboom, and lessen the damage coming out from high horsepower, which is probably the best option to hit into Incineroar at this point. It means that Ryan can afford to play a very slow game, mounting damage onto these Pokemon.
Oh, well, I mean, take a look at that. The high horsepower this time, but it's only going to do about 30% to this Incineroar. You can see how those Intimidates are really starting to stack up. Umbreon goes for the Yawn. It does have to take a Pollen Puff here after the Terastallization has already been spent on that Urshifu. And it's going to be a little bit in a predicament right now.
Umbreon is just going to keep getting whittled down. Ryan is maybe forced to switch by a Yawn, but I think the slow pace of this game is probably just in Ryan's advantage. Between the Intimidates and the Regenerator can just kind of heal back up, whereas Umbreon does not have that same advantage, doesn't have any recovery move. That damage will stick other than Grassy Train resetting, and eventually even Grassy Train will go away unless Keon finds an opportunity to get Rillaboom on and off the field. Feels like Keon's going to have to make something happen, probably by pivoting out into whatever's in the back to kind of force this into more of an offensive game.
Well, the Amoongus not going to be able to do too much there, especially if he gets put to sleep. That means that this Raging Bolt's going to take this high horsepower instead. As the Incineroar just goes for a parting shot, that's going to be a third drop onto this Rillaboom's attack stat, making those high horsepowers hurt less and less. Also, gives an opportunity for this Incineroar to maybe even get this Amoongus back in. Take a look at the Regenerator healing. It's already back up to full.
This is exactly the kind of slow pace and cycling that I'm talking about. Ryan can afford to do this and just build an advantage slowly.
A foul play into the Raging Bolt, actually not too bad of damage there. And it is going to make sure that this Raging Bolt is potentially in knockout range of yet another foul play, or even just a double up into the slot for insurance.
I think you're right. Keon's doing the right thing to try to punch a hole, and that's why you have to break this kind of cycling core. Manages to find the Raging Bolt on the switch in with a high horsepower plus a foul play combination to land probably the most damage he possibly could have in that turn into the most vulnerable target. Now pretty low in health, and Amoongus is just going to protect itself and leave this Raging Bolt hanging, trying to get one attack off before going down.
Well, the Rillaboom is able to hit the high horsepower, but it's going to be just a sliver of HP, too little to take it out. Thunderbolt in response, but this Umbreon does go for the foul play double up. So the Raging Bolt that eluded the knockout just a couple of turns ago finally gets taken out.
Very KO for Keon to kind of finish business ago. Raging Bolt KO mode. The entry for Calyrex Ice Rider. That now with the translation spent, the very lowered attack Rillaboom on the other side, way to get away from that Glacial Lance. Of course, it may just want to get off the field anyway to reset those Intimidates. You have to imagine Zation working in the back, which is going to have a much better matchup against Calyrex Ice Rider. Can try. We saw the foul playing consistently in the last game, even after Calyrex Ice Rider becomes a fire type. The damage does mount up. Of course, Umbreon is torn between two goals. It has to both start to deal the damage to Calyrex to pick up the KO, or for foul play to finish the KO, but it has to also stop from putting the entire sleep. If Keon doesn't have the opportunity to taunt while Amoongus is for a sleep onto Zation, could be game in.
Well, here's a little bit of respite here for Keon. Is able to remove that Rillaboom, reset those drops, as you said, gets the Zoc with that Intrepid Sword boost, but has to find a way to keep it. As Ryan is now going to match the Terastallization. It's a chance to invest that into this Ice Rider Calyrex, and that is going to make it take these attacks so much better with both of these Pokemon that Keon has on the other side. But it's about whether or not Keon can actually rise here with the taunt, and the Calyrex knows that one of the biggest issues that we're going to have here in this game is if this Trick Room gets set up, and now knows that the Trick Room was what was selected.
Such a good call from Keon on that previous turn. Could have been a taunt. But Amoongus damage into Calyrex, but finds the perfect thing, which is preventing that Trick Room from going up and the Calyrex from grabbing the speed advantage. Still an uphill battle. Still Amoongus at full health and Calyrex at full health. The Intimidate still lurking in the back. That Intrepid Sword boost. Point Ryan feels like that, but that is a step in the right direction. It's one of many turns that Keon's going to need to get right to kind of claw back a solid position in this game, because of the fundamental problem of the type chart here, and Zation really not being able to find that easy of damage into the Calyrex Ice Rider.
Well, that damage is going to be harder. These Zashians on stream have not had to deal with before. Is Intimidate. And because there's no clear amulet on this Crown Zacian, because it's holding that Rusted Sword, it has no choice except to have to kind of take these Intimidate drops. One way that it can get past that, though, is by going for these sword stances, as Umbreon's just going to keep firing off these yawns. Wow. Worse, have to make this rotation for a time.
If that does make a huge shot on the just because that's just
to Lance as one of two attacking options that this Ice Rider Calyrex does have. So Keon risking it, bringing this Rillaboom back in, hopefully to not have to take an attack like that. You get a chance to set up the Grassy Surge, but more that what you really want is to be able to get out something like the high horsepower. But the play rough, it's gonna miss the Incineroar. Keon can just not catch a break as the high horsepower lands into the Zacian itself. That's several misses in a row that Keon has had to deal with. Still has a chance in this game, but it's not easy.
Really crucial misses from fairly accurate attacks. Play rough is not a move like Bleak Wind Storm that misses all the time. Still, I don't think a bad turn for Keon. The turn would have been disastrous if high horsepower had been enough damage to pick up the KO on Zacian, but Incineroar falls asleep, Zacian's still on the field, Rillaboom finds a safe entry to now threaten Fake Out into the Calyrex Ice Rider on the other side. That gives a free turn for the Zacian now to either go for a Sword Stance or to start picking up damage. I think the complexion of the game looks a little bit better for Keon after that last turn, despite the Play Rough miss. Would have looked even better if Play Rough had landed and threatened a KO into Incineroar on the other side.
Can Keon actually get another Sword Stance set up, though? As this Rillaboom is actually going to take another reprieve. This Umbreon taking its place on the field still at such a low HP, but needs to make sure that it can still provide that utility after this Ice Rider Calyrex has shaken off the taunt. While we do see yet another pivot of this Amoonguss now coming back in to take that Incineroar's place, but the Protect here, did Keon call this right? He's been able to weave in so many risky plays before and gets it right again with yet another Sword Stance. So this Zacian is now has several stacks of increased attack.
Keon betting it all on the Calyrex Ice Rider Protect there. Doesn't throw the Fake Out into that slot, just trusts that the Calyrex will understand the threat and will protect on that turn. Switches the Rillaboom out to try to threaten Fake Out in a future turn, gets Umbreon back in to threaten Taunt into Amoonguss on this turn, and gives Zacian another 2 stages of boosted attack, now at +4. That means even if Incineroar comes back in and intimidates, the Zacian will still be at +3. The problem is that even at +3, Zacian is not threatening a KO into this Calyrex because it only has resisted moves. And it becomes very difficult to see how, with Umbreon at this low of health, Keon finds extra attacks into that slot. Something like a Foul Play and Play Rough double up into Calyrex can be really easily disrupted by a Rage Powder at this point.
And Rage Powder feels like the perfect thing to use when you know that this Zacian cannot actually deal with that. And it's just going to go for another Sword Stance. So it doesn't even fall victim to the idea that this Amoonguss could Rage Powder it away. But it does mean that this Foul Play is going to land into it instead. Umbreon going to knock itself out from that rocky helmet collision, and it's just going to leave this Calyrex open to go for the Glacial Lance. A huge risk here for Keon that is not going to pay off this time around, losing the Zacian in the process and just having the Rillaboom left to stand.
Only Rillaboom to deal with Amoonguss and Calyrex that now has boosts. It sounds like it's a little bit too much to deal with. Maybe a high horsepower critical hit. But no, I think Brian has found the window. Felt like he had a big lead, and Keon was just making all of the right plays to stay in this game, try to stay ahead in this game, but ultimately, Brian finds the window and moves into the finals of the LA Regional Championship.